Where is Maman? There she is, dans son jardin d'hiver. This is my mother's house. It's also my brother's house, because he owns it. My brother, who passed away last fall. He just wouldn't let me paint him in peace. Every paintbrush, every glob of color went on wrong, and this way we wrestled far into the night. So I'm doing this series with the detachment of a Zen monk. Send me the light and the love I need as I clean up the attic of my mind. Thank you. This is my mom and me. I did this watercolor from sketches I did when I visited in 2024 in Nanaimo. My mom just boogied her butt out of her kitchen and jigged it around the carved chair. She was showing me how strong and healthy she is for being a quote-unquote 100-year-old relic. Then told to sit for the incoming tea by Francois's widow, my sister-in-law, Denine. Ha! That face my mom makes when she's biting her tongue. Il fait froid dehors. Il fait très froid. For about half an hour now, I've been listening to my mom pacing in her chilly living room, softly wondering out loud where everyone has gone to. Où c'est qui tout le monde? Où c'est qui? I watched her push the door to my dad's room 3 times already, afraid to go in. She's been told not to. But as the sun rises, I say, "Hello, Mama." And her heart leaps with joy. She comes to the bed and, very concerned for my well-being, reaches for the blanket and pulls it snug upon my shoulders. In a few hours hence, Francois' funerals would begin. As the cold ground stands by on this glacial morning. My mama is penned in inside her apartment. The doors to the outside don't work, nor does the kettle, the TV, or the baseboards. And we sleep in our day clothes up here, in Canada, apparently. The landlord next door, Francois, my brother, who was also my mom's golden child, is getting buried today. 3 pieces of fruit from the party tray for breakfast. And will be dashing off to church. I have been warned by his widow to not mention his name to my mom. The last time I saw my brother, Francois, was when I went up to Nanaimo to visit my dad's freshly dug grave in June of 23. Francois permitted me a visit with Maman. She and I walked up and down the driveway twice. My mom explained that she wasn't allowed to leave the property. She explained that her son owned all the land, all the way to Montreal, and that she has to hide in the basement when the bombs are going off. Then I was led to the patio, and we ate lame cupcakes. Francois looked translucent, had purple lips, and sores that had seemingly been there forever. Who knew that in a few months' time he would meet his untimely death at the hands of an infected heart? Here he is, gazing at his barn and perhaps the blue sky, with nothing to say, in spite of 20 years of estrangement. And Alex Jones' Infowar going down in flames. I had 5 siblings, and now I have 4. Martin held a wake for Francois in his backyard the night before the funeral mass. My other 2 sisters attended. The third one is a nun in a cloister in Belgium. And perhaps she was there in prayer. I don't know. Maman doesn't know where her husband is. She's been looking for Claude for a while now. And she's not told that Francois has died. She'll be looking for Francois too. But it is impossible to give her a sense of peace. Or at least try. Because Deneen doesn't permit any of her children to access Louise. I asked my mom during my visit to stand next to her painting. She painted it after the 5th and before the 6th child, and then no more paintings. This is when I saw it, the thread between motherhood idealized and motherhood realized. She used to say, "My children is my art." She was not wrong. I have taken this to heart into my own motherhood. In the quick summer light of June 1967, my mom got a big house en banlieue de Montréal. My papa's papa and my papa trucked it in from somewhere and wrapped it up in limestone and bricks. She placed her first 3 babies in the grass. Catherine in the pink hat, Francois in the blue hat, Genevieve in the bassinet. And she sat in the sun, in her bikini, her belly full of me. The house was on that strange lot that one finds at the bottom of a cul-de-sac, this one abutting the highway up above. My memories of childhood are distorted, so Google Earth was helpful. Within a mile radius there was a Canadian Pacific Railways station, a water treatment plant, and a Mack truck factory. But all I really remember was the thirsty weeping willow and the house that Max, our dog, had left behind. Max, the German Doberman Pinscher hound, jumped the chain link fence once too many times. He was a bad dog, apparently. The world got much narrower in the winter. Religion and politics in my house went hand in hand. Our salle de jeu downstairs contained 4 school desks and my father's books, while Maman upstairs looked after Martin the baby and Isabelle the toddler. Monsieur Lemay looked after the other 4. He had been a philosophy professor, and he spent 4 hours a day with us, teaching us Latin, Greek, Homer, and Plato. But his strong suit was that he belonged to the same ideology as my papa's, and this did keep him in my parents' employ for years to come, from the time I was 8 to the time I turned 15. I never saw the outside world. My father's books were divided in 3 main topics: Catholicism, allopathic, naturopathic medicine, and the Third Reich. On the lower shelves, though, is where Tintin and Spirou led us into spirited imaginary places around the globe. In the basement of this house is also where I lived. There were 2 big rooms, la salle de jeu, where the school desks were, and this one, le bureau de papa. Even though my dad came in here less than 10 times in my whole entire life. His books line the shelves here too, most of them in English. In the far corner, away from the furnace's jumpy roar and the washing machine's spin cycle, was mine and Catherine's cot. I spent a lot of time gazing at the Lifetime books on great art and putting myself to sleep this way. I know that my papa loved Antonio Vivaldi, the composer, but other than that, we never had a conversation about art. No, not once ever. Except for this one thing one day when I was 14. As he was looking at his books, he pulled one down from the high shelf, and as I was nearby, he casually handed it to me. "Did you know that Hitler was an artist too?" he said. Again, it wasn't written in French. All of our books were mostly in English. But that hardly matters for picture books. I flipped through the pages and nodded in approval to gain his approval. But I did wonder inside the privy of my mind if he had ever heard of Vincent van Gogh. Adjacent to le bureau was la salle de lavage. All the dressing and the undressing happened here. Papa, François, and Martin, and also Mama and Isabelle and Genevieve used the master bathroom upstairs because that's where the 3 bedrooms were. The routine scrub down, however, for the other 3, well, the big kids, happened in the utility sink in la salle de lavage. The cold wall had 6 lockers, 1 for each kid. Next to the oil furnace, we'd hang our wet snowsuits to dry. One day, perhaps because my big sister was getting too big for the utility sink, we started swimming lessons. La piscine became part of our daily routine, and we never looked back. My mom always kept her nails elegantly conditioned and filed, and they dug through the short hair quite deep. Nooks and crannies also did better with chlorinated pool water. Seems like I never really got dirty, never needed deep scratching thereafter. This is my younger self. I love her. I love that beautiful wise child who has led me through life with such unfailing grace. Papa's understanding of la tradition and le patrimoine hinged on la discipline, which he meant to carve upon the stones that we were. A typical day would start before the dawn, with a mile run on icy streets and occasionally a game of hockey on boy skates, later replaced with a 2-mile swim, then breakfast. Our habitual contact with the outside world was la piscine and la messe on Sundays. Sundays were by far the best. Wake up, put on a fancy dress, drive to la messe en ville, and come home to breakfast. On Sundays, we'd see both Mama and Papa busy themselves in the kitchen. I didn't mind waiting for the second round of crepes. When the pans were nice and hot and the entire world had become fragrant, then we'd help ourselves to the crème sûre, the bananas, and oh my soul, le sirop d'érable. This until the belly was round and stuck out, and this, to me, was the holiest of holy. Next to the kitchen was la salle à dîner, adjoining le salon, where les grandes personnes talked with a huge fancy glass in their hands, but not too often. We would kneel there in the evening for the rosary. It was hard to not fall back on my heels. I would focus on the latest cross at the far end of the room, and le petit point, called les glaneuses, which I did not know yet was after Millet. I studied the carving on Maman's chair, its luscious wood lumps and its backrest, which had deeply cut into the maple, a weary man pulling the plough, who I thought could use a chair to sit on. I wondered how the corpus on the cross could go through everything he had gone through and not lose that little towel my papa wore in between the bathroom and his room. Sunday evenings after rosary and in our long johns, reading aloud time would happen in le salon. I think it was Papa's way of assessing our schooling progress. Sharing stories before others was pure joy to me. But my token book was rather simplistic, both in design and in composition. Maman must have thought it sweet that its main protagonist was named Little Tiny Wee Anne, or a contraption thereof. I personally thought Francois should have my book, since it was about a sailorman and a small girl who had adventures on the high sea in a skiff. And I thought I should have his, Chinese folk tales, for its illustrations. When he got stuck on a word, I'd scoot over and take over the story, and he would totally let me. Gods and goddesses took form before us. Oh, but how they looked to a person depended on how a person looked at them. To me, it didn't matter if they were Zeus or Jupiter or Yahweh or Chinese water nymphs, because they were all made of the same stuff I was made of. Once a year, we'd be called upstairs to greet my papa's mom's sister. Her name was Tante Eva, and her husband's name was Oncle Alfred. I planted a fig tree in her honor in my landlord's yard in Victoria years later, and though it has been shorn by careless pruning, I visit it once a year, and it still bears 2 harvests a year, which nearly touch the ground. Tante Eva never had children of her own. Tante Eva would come when the leaves had fallen and the ground had begun to freeze. She would bring a yearly box of expensive prism color pencils, probably because she had been asked to not bring anything. The palette was limited in scope and range, but I still managed to draw plenty of horses with them, and they would appear as strong and alive as I could make them. Mama had 12 siblings whom we never met. We must have a million cousins that we still don't know. Difficult bridges to rebuild. My papa was a single child. Neither Mama or Papa had mamas and papas. Grands were a foreign concept, which got eaten by the big bad wolves while I was dilly-dallying in the forest. Which is to say that our one remaining grandmama lived in a Montreal home with a roommate in a big building maintained by nuns. She wasn't allowed in our house. My papa's mind map went something like this. In my awareness, this chronological order. Some of these people even came to our house. Paul Carton, Yves Normandin, the local priest, Saint Yvette, the local parish, Trappiste, the local monastery, Père Henri, the local missionary, l'Abbé Roch, the emissary from Switzerland, Marcel Lefebvre, the leader of the rebellion in Switzerland, Schism, Vatican II, Latin Mass, Écone, Society of St Pius X, Le Barou, Roman Catholic Church, Pope, Rome, the Protocols of Zion, La Question Juive, the Jewish question, World War II, Adolf Hitler, Goebbels, Mussolini, Franco, Pétain, Churchill, David Irving, James Keegstra, Ernst Zundel, Doug Christie, Germany, Dresden, Poland, Lech Walesa, communism, free speech, hate crime, Auschwitz, Holocaust, Holocaust denial, Palestine, Liban, children, St. Mary's Academy, Kansas, Zeitgeist, growing up Catholic. Papa believed that he knew more about health matters than most doctors, so we never saw doctors. When my big sister was born in December, when rickets, brittle bones, happened, he and Maman figured out that vitamin D could be had just by placing the baby in the afternoon sun, which Maman did from January on. Blissful moments usually did center around snow play. Once we went on a long road trip to visit the biggest vertical rise in the Laurentides, Mont Tremblant. We brought our sleds, but barely out of the car, and with the slope ahead, I retched. My teeth were chattering and my head hurt. Papa simply put me back in the car. He turned the heaters on, and I huddled into the space next to the heater. I waited there for a while, and the day ended, and I don't remember how, but a bit later my 5 siblings got the chills too, and we all got sick, and we called it immunization, nature's way. A number of months after the chicken pox, I got the mumps, and I got to sleep upstairs that time in my parents' bedroom. I enjoyed being in my mama's and papa's room. It was beautiful. It had a night table, a secrétaire, 2 upholstered chairs, 1 big chest for the blankets, 2 big closets, and a humongous bed, carpet, and wallpaper. Maman wrapped my neck in one of Papa's big wool sock and pinned it there with a diaper pin after rubbing some Bengay on my neck and chest. She made me a grog, which is honey, hot milk, egg yolk, and brandy, and I don't remember the days that went by after that. Advent was a time of mortification, and even as my papa had 6 children and never attended a birth, he understood that the last month of Mother Mary's pregnancy must have been hell. We put small and knowing rocks in our furry slippers for awareness, skipped dessert, slept without a pillow. At least I did. December was nevertheless glorious. Snowbanks would form, and the winter quietude did soothe my temperament. On Christmas Eve, Papa would go out knee-deep in the powdery white and hang the lights on our Christmas trees outside, beneath which we never found any presents because bébé Jésus was born in deep poverty. Dr. Paul Carton's name was invoked every time Papa addressed health issues and nutritional protocols. However, and in spite of the beneficial properties of vegetarianism and the triple boiling of carrots herein recommended, which I read about but never witnessed, Maman's kitchen produced the traditional dishes that French colons had brought with them from Normandy. Hearty little Macintosh apples, local to Quebec's cooler latitude, too small to have their hearts carved out before baking, were turned whole into sauce and pies in the fall. Hams and the occasional turkey and beef were processed into hash, yielding pâté chinois with Heinz ketchup and Miracle Whip ham sandwiches. Pea soup with ham hock was a constant. Weirdly enough, Maman made hot dogs on Friday. Hot dogs are not real meat, right? And once in a while, we were treated to McDonald's on Sundays after Mass. Tourtière with Heinz ketchup and beignets and gingerbread made a spectacular appearance in December. But I wished for them all year round. I was 9 when Santa came to my house for the first time. I knew Maman had filled the little red sacks and hung them up on the banister, but I'm pretty sure Santa didn't know we even existed. So it was good of her to pretend he had found us. I do not have a better Christmas memory than this one. We had gone to midnight mass in that big cold gym. 3 masses, in fact, because more souls can get out of purgatory that way. It's a special dispensation for Christmas. And we had come to tourtière and cream puffs filled with crème anglaise, covered in whipped cream, shaped in a tiny pyramid. The night sky was filled with so many stars. I did not understand how les trois rois mages, the 3 kings, could pick just one bright one and follow it, carrying things that only, I surmise, magicians would. When the Novus Ordo became the modus operandi of the post-Vatican II Council of the Catholic Church in the early 70s, Archbishop Lefebvre stood in defiance of the papal authority, which earned him and his followers an official excommunication decree. The word says it all, but La Tradition took it up as a war declaration from Rome and decided to build its own priests and its own parishes from seed, its own army, as Papa would put it, albeit tiny nascent cells, then spread all over the globe. As a result, we were never more permitted by the local archbishops, bishops, and priests to attend the Latin Mass on official real estate property of the Catholic Church. We attended Mass in private homes where the living room's TV set was clothed in holy embroidery cloth and transmuted into an altar. The Latin Mass was typically celebrated by a traveling priest. Also, it happened in school gymnasiums and once, for a long while, in the banquet room hall downstairs from a brasserie, where the leftovers, the breadsticks and the butter from the night before tasted just as good as the holy body of Christ after the obscure rite was said and done. It seemed to me that the adults in my world were preoccupied with the end of the world. The first moving picture experience we were treated to was Bambi in a real theater. I was 9. Then the Tower Inferno, also in gigantically vivid images as an anti-pyro measure, I presently reckon. Then The Swarm, which is about killer bees. Perhaps a reactivity to Silent Spring that I've now read. Then Patton, recused from duty for his Nazi empathy. The latter two of which we watched on Papa's new TV in his closet upstairs. Genevieve somehow snuck in Deer Hunter a few years later because my papa had been hiding the TV upstairs in his closet, and one day it had drifted into the closet downstairs, also on a highboy dresser, however within reach of Francois sneaking around. Unfortunately, it would take me years to process Deer Hunter, as I really believed back then that fire destroyed everything, love, that I was helpless without my pack, and that war was a black and white decision. I would have to forge around as an adult to make my way to Apocalypse Now, which ironically had been directed by a very Catholic director, Sir Francis Ford Coppola. I had to find myself a crown, but how? The symbols in my mind, they met, but they could not coalesce. This was our exercise yard from the time I was 8 to the time I was 15. We were at the pool as a tribe from 4 to 7 p.m., Monday to Friday. Then we added a morning practice, and then it was twice all that on holidays, except for the summer. We did laps around the equator several times over. Here might be an introvert's paradise, but it was mostly collision avoidance and tsunami surfing. I hung on to numbers. Lap numbers, lane numbers, best time numbers, split numbers, seconds before the next breath number. It was a lot for a girl who would never grow beyond 5'2" and who wished for music lessons instead. What interaction we had with the others was through foggy swim goggles, but I met a goddess there who was missing an arm and a leg, and she swam fast, and we exchanged smiles whenever we could. Born on the cusp of winter's equinox, my sister's skin appeared translucent, her hair the color of December's moon. Genevieve could swim 800 meters freestyle in 12 minutes. And fast, along with Papa, during Lent. 10 days without food, 10 days on just water. What Genevieve could not do, however, is sit through Mama's trims without tears. There, by the back door, in between the dishwasher and the refrigerator, she would begin to cry, and her tears would flow for many a day afterwards. Curled up in a corner for hours at a time, she would hold her short hair, bereft at the thought, I suppose, that the moonlight had now also gone from her. I did not think my hair was as pretty as hers, and I think that is why I didn't hurt as much. Besides, we didn't have hairbrushes, so Mama was right. It would get really messy really fast if we didn't all agree with her. Monsieur Lemay lived in a studio on the far side of the house. He lived there for many years, in exchange for the daily time he spent with us during the week. On Saturdays, we'd be sent to clean his room. He was a chain smoker and a political writer, and we did not linger in his apartment too long. When the task was done, Monsieur Le May would stand ready to gift us with a bit of money, which I would give right back to him, asking him to smuggle in from the outside world the latest Agatha Christie, or Arsène Lupin, or Doug Savage novel there might be out there. A brown bag with the goods in it would appear shortly thereafter on the ledge above the oil tank near the studio's door, and this lesson went far beyond what Plato, Socrates, and Homer could do from the grave, to discuss reason and the application thereof. One year in the midwinter, Papa and Maman got in a big fight with Mr. Le May, and it may well have been because he had tried to smuggle too much of the outside world into the house. It may well have been by accident, because Monsieur Le May had met a lady, Isabel, and he had become quite entangled with her, disappearing on Saturdays and Sundays just to be with her. Isabel, the lady, had an infectious personality, and she had arrived in our lives with a real Santa load of presents for all the children in the house, the magnitude of which we had never seen, which my mom promptly stuffed into the camp shower downstairs until she could deal with Valère and Isabel's insurgency on that very Christmas day. That day, all the presents, still all wrapped, were placed back into Isabel's car, and the lady scooped up Valère, and we never saw him or them again. But this was effectively when the walls of my Maman's and Papa's Camelot came tumbling down. After Monsieur Le May left, there were weeks of silence in the icy January house, where not a word was spoken. The pod could no longer be handled as one. It would have to be dissolved, and the fragments thrown south and west, childhood closed. The oldest was getting near that age where marriage becomes a solution, and the youngest wasn't yet 10. For some reason, the only rational thing to do was to presently disappear the 6 children and sell the house. Some kids would go to the idea of a school in Kansas, a then nascent stronghold of the traditionalist movement, and some would be released into the wild to begin their independent lives as domestics to other Catholic families, this one in BC. When last summer in Quebec held a few ecstatic gems of happiness, like when we discovered the drive-in and that Catherine could drive the station wagon, and we watched E.T. fly into the starry night, or at least I did. Father Normandin knew every traditionalist home in the country, in Canada, after being ousted from his paroisse in Montreal for refusing to say the modern Mass. He had become the ambassador of tradition to all the faithfuls in Canada who needed the Latin Mass said in their home. This is how he knew of Larry and Carol Donnelly in BC, who had an altar in their house and 6 children. The priest floated the idea that they might be amenable to taking on a couple more kids, and indeed they were. The Donnellys had emigrated from the US and were building a new life for themselves on Vancouver Island. Things turned out for the men involved, as Larry and Papa became best friends. and theirs was a relationship which would last until my papa passed, decades later. The Donnellys cleared a room across the hall from the altar room on the second floor, and this is where Catherine had landed after her flight over to BC in March. And this is where I joined her 5 months later, after a long, non-stop drive across the country, alone with my silent papa. Then he handed the keys of the car to Catherine, and he flew back to Montreal to fold the rest. Catherine and I were to make ourselves useful to our new environment, which was a bit difficult because we did not have a common language. One might say that house chores are house chores, but even the pantry contained things I did not know pantries contained, the labels of which I could not understand. So Carol sat at the kitchen table, cracking school books open for her children, which arrived by mail, while teaching me from a distance how to make Thousand Island salad dressing using equal parts mayo, ketchup, and relish. The days would start with prayers in the chapel, and end there too after dinner, also with prayers. The days would start with Larry tapping on all the doors upstairs, but eventually also a peek inside our room, and then a sit on the bed, and then, well, things which my therapist said last year is good to journal about, which is what I'm doing right now. It was a strange kind of freedom. Maman was still à la maison in Sainte Thérèse with her number one son, and Papa was somewhere in between the 3 points, Quebec, BC, Kansas, erasing our story. Catherine was living up to the assertion that she was getting a job, part-time receptionist for Larry's business and part-time lifeguard at a health club nearby. I practically never saw my big sister. In between meal prep and dishes, I would read. This was a hostile environment for a voracious reader who did not speak the household tongue. But one day, Carol's mom, who also lived in the house, had taken a book from her shelf and said, "You'll like this one." Trusting her guidance, I undertook the massive task of reading Little Women while also looking up every word. And it did take me months to finish this one book. However frustratingly slow the read was, and once done with it, I pompously declared that this was how all novels should be written. I struggled with gendered words, but oh my fucking God, when I realized Joe wasn't a boy's name, I was all in. With the March sisters in the lead, I would learn to navigate life's choices with wild pragmatism while at anchor deep within my own heart, and this did have a lot in common with the kind of sovereignty that my mama's canaries exercised when they sang. Maman had signed us up for the Navy League and the Royal Canadian Sea Cadets back in Quebec, and the two organizations would team up in the summer for sailing lessons on the Saint Laurent, which I liked. I inquired and discovered that there was also a Sea Cadet Corps in Nanaimo, and now of age, I could definitely join the mature group. And somehow, a bit late in the season, I convinced Lisa, she came to the chapel on Sundays, to join the weekly meetings with me. Sometimes the adults would be late in picking us up after the meeting, and so Lisa and I would scuttle on to the jukebox in the mall nearby, and she would use up all of her nickels and dimes on just the one song. I love rock and roll by Joan Jett, and I really enjoyed how she sang all the words and danced. I would try to translate the impossible for me, which she managed to do, but not with words. One day, Lisa and her family, and this rather abruptly, stopped coming to Larry's house on Sundays. And my mama would later theorize that Larry had probably done to Lisa what Larry had done to Catherine and me, but it's always been just a theory. Fall and winter passed before I was to see Mama again. The house in Quebec had sold, and now we needed a new one on the West Coast. That Easter, Larry had unzipped his pants and made for my sister. And that is when his grooming spell broke. On a quiet Sunday afternoon at exactly the same time as his wife was coming up the gravel driveway, driving a Suburban packed full of their children, Catherine snapped out of the winter-long trance. She said something about Larry to Papa, and after hearing her, Papa chose to hear Larry too. It may have been that Larry was seen as a pious man, or it may have been that Papa was now selling construction materials for him, and had therefore become reliant on Larry's business to pay the bills. I do not know. But what heft he had, Larry used it to demonstrate that even good men could fall prey to Satan, which Papa, probably still fresh from picking a fight with Mr. LeMay, empathized with. Larry knelt before Claude, added a tear or two, and altogether failed to mention that he had also helped himself to the other sister, which is how I instantly knew his so-called confession was phony. But I wasn't there when this happened, and the forum for witness testimony was never convened. So there you go, Maria Goretti, the saint who jumped out the window to escape her predator. Everyone weirdly relied on the Sea Cadets now to save me, including me. I distinctly felt a wave of relief sweep through my tribe when I disappeared into the sea, on the sea, with the sea, not taking any room at all in the new house. Steve, a FAL cadet, and I sailed in the BC Regionals, followed by the Canadian Nationals in Winnipeg a couple of months later, where we placed 7th, which I mention because my brother, representing Quebec as a veteran competitor, placed 23rd, and neither he nor Papa ever acknowledged that girls can be good at some stuff, given a modicum of a chance to shine, even if it's all by accident. After the Nationals were over at CFB Gimli in Manitoba that year, seats on planes going east and west were being filled by cadets who had competed in the Nationals and who were now heading home. The word escape never once entered my mind. Papa had said to use my Sea Cadet's wages to get myself on a bus to Kansas, south. Within the construct of my mind, this was akin to the promised land, as I would be reunited to parts of my tribe, the 3 of my other siblings, who had already spent a year there and were now well ensconced in its fold. I was looking forward to family. Even though I had never been to school, which is not the same as saying that I had never learned anything, Papa had arranged for me to hop right into junior year, next to Genevieve, my sister, who was 9 months older than me, which is to say 17, just like me at that time. The school itself, St. Mary's Academy, was approximately 5 years old at the time, and relied on everyday people who were staunchly devoted to la tradition to impart its curriculum. to the growing number of children spawning within the society's value system. To ensure that this burgeoning community would be recognized by the state as a religious entity, the Society of St Pius X's European headquarters dispatched a healthy contingency of freshly minted society nuns and priests, who spoke mostly French, and who blended in with the Americans like burgers on a baguette. St. Mary's Academy, St. Mary's, Kansas, 1983. A Jesuit campus built on the Oregon Trail, which the Society of St. Pius X had purchased 5 years earlier. Shortly after the purchase, the church edifice itself, the Immaculata Chapel, had somehow caught on fire and loomed over the grounds, now an eerie symbol of demonic assault against the one true faith. Here I landed, spent by a windy summer with Sea Cadets, and 1,000-mile bus ride from Winnipeg, going right through BTK's hunting grounds at the height of his killing spree. It's easy to digress. This was also a very short time after one of the society's priests, Father Juan Fernandez Cron, having apparently gone rogue, had stabbed the Pope in Fatima with an absurdly long knife. A bad Pope, who in spite of this managed to survive. To add to the strangeness of things, my sister Genevieve had already packed out of our room. In her stead, Mrs. Kaiser had obligingly allocated Susie, another newbie to the school, who had gone ahead and decorated her wall. I thought it odd that she would hang the flag from Dukes of Hazzard, and readily admit, too, that she had never heard of said TV show. How could she have not? Even Canadians at cadet camp watched it. Clearly, my English fumbling still needed work. If nothing else, to mend that bad first impression my worldliness would nevertheless sear into her, and probably the rest of my classmates. My bigger concern was how to be in the 11th grade. And how would I manage keeping up with Genevieve, also a junior, nearly 18 years of age, and literally 1 whole year ahead of me here? I think Papa's plan was to have us finish high school at the same time. Flattering? I suspect not. It may have had a lot more to do with financing than my saggy little ego will admit. In 2017, long past my daughter's graduation from Wexley Environmental College in Urban Design, I applied for educational benefits at the local community college. The local community college placed me at a grade 6 level in science and math. English comprehension, however, had drastically gone from 0 to second-year college during the same lapse of time, which to me is like an ant lifting 10 times her own weight. It's been hard work, learning everything the hard way, but I manage the French and the English now pretty well. Other Catholic families had begun settling in St. Mary's, Kansas. 5 years into the project, the Society of St. Pius X had the century-old Jesuit mission churning back to life with new zeal for Christ and the promise of future bumper crops of devotees. According to the Census Bureau, the ebbing trend was sharply thrown into reverse at that time. St. Mary's, said to be 1,600 strong in the 80s, is now twice that, though it remains solidly 90% white, with 31% living beneath the poverty line and a per capita income of $16,000 a year, which makes all of this very, very Catholic. However, and for more than a year now, I had not sat at the table with my own family to eat a single meal, and the hope that it would ever happen again has remained frustrated by all sorts of distances over the years since. Here now, then, I would catch glimpses of my two sisters, Genevieve and Isabel, in the school's cafeteria, but my little brother Martin was definitely already engulfed in the boys' half of the school. I was Christina in Christina's world, her hand reaching either for stability or gain, or both, perhaps. In this masterpiece by Mr. Wyeth, hanging at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, in this piece, the space between Christina and home is immeasurable because the body of Christina suffers from a degenerative neuromuscular disorder and cannot walk. But the author does not tell you this because this piece isn't about Christina. It's about her resolve and what stands in between her and her house. The absent wheelchair is the bridge between two concepts and what Christina makes of it. The self and what it identifies as self-actualization, suspended in what the viewer establishes as the stark reality of direct contact with grass, mud, and a visual on the rickety house up on the hill. The reality is brutal, but for a soul already summoned out of soil and rock, it is also comfort, and Christina, distance notwithstanding, is factually home. My hill that year was precisely where the Awerkamp family had set up their homestead, as it was most definitely perched on a similar mount. The students who did not go home, the Canadians, basically me and my siblings, were folded into that family home that year to create a surreal and oh so perfect introduction to the annual feast that is American Thanksgiving. Never mind the Epicurean feast ahead. The Awerkamp girls were named after states, and this was a delicious fancy for an explorer. There was my classmate Georgia and her sisters Carolina, Louisiana, and Virginia, and also Mary Lynn. 8 kids in all, I think, and boys too, but they were named normal. Their small house near the River Kaw was presently being dusted over with snow, which is where Kansas really shines as an ecological wonder, with nothing but the apparent stillness of nature. One's gaze naturally drifts up into the vastness of the sky and begins to wonder at what else it can hold.